Roger, go for deploy.
Welcome back to Adventure Street Radio. We are sitting here with AzizAl-Doory, or we're going to call him for the sake of
Steve.
me and Tommy.
We'll call him Steve.
Yeah, we're going to call him Steve today. No, we're going to call him Aziz. And Aziz is a Game of Thrones historian to a degree.
I'd say.
And before we throw over to Aziz and welcome him in, we're going to give him Tommy's tribute with a little bit of Doc's.
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of me.
A little bit of Doc's Family Feud.
Yeah. All right, here we go. There
There we go. All right, so.
And then how do we go?
Let's go. So you go. Dun, 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 dun. All right, kick it off again. Here we go. Here we go. And AzizAl-Doory, he's the man. He will tell you everything he can. He runs a podcast known as History of Westeros. Aziz gets all the girls cause he's a boss. What's the inside scoop with Khaleesi's ring? Is she fake or is she wearing a wig? I'm obsessed with Khaleesi, I'm sure you're too. You're gonna last a little bit. It's sad we'll never bone her because we look like poo. And finally, Aziz, are you a nerd or are you cool? This last little bit. Please take all our Game of Thrones fans to fucking school. Welcome, mate.
Oh, shit. I don't know if I held up my end of the bargain, but that's great. Aziz, sorry for putting you through that, mate. Normally it's a guitar ensemble, but
Sing along.
yeah, but we decided to mix it up today. So, hey, Aziz, so welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Right on. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. As you've gone through my name very well, I don't have to repeat that. But yes, History of Westeros podcast is our show, and I've been doing this for about 6 years. I first read the books, the Game of Thrones books, back in around 2000, 2001, and just fell in love with them and got myself involved in the community and started doing, posting and talking to people and thinking I knew what was going on, but I really was like Jon Snow. I knew nothing back in the day. But that was a long time ago.
Well played.
I remember going through, like in 2006, hearing that HBO had picked up the pilot for the TV show, and there's a lot of excitement. People started fan casting all the way back then. It's a really long, fun process, seeing this community grow from just a bunch of cool nerds. To answer the question, we can be both at the same time.
Doesn't really make any sense, does it?
Things on, yeah, exactly. Not really, but, on forums and having it grow to be just this phenomenon. It's a kind of a cultural, I guess you could call it a cultural phenomenon. It's it's larger than just about any fandom, with a few exceptions. Harry Potter, Star Wars, there's some bigger ones out there, but those are also a phenomena too. And it's really amazing to see how so many people come together and have fun over a piece of entertainment. But it is really good entertainment. It's really well made, both books and show, and I love covering it.
That's great, man. So I'm not quite sure absolutely how this works in the grand scheme of your life, but are you full time in Game of Thrones? Is this what you do as a living?
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
I didn't
sick.
start doing it that way, but we did it for fun, for just for kicks, kind of when podcasting was a little bit newer. There weren't a lot of people doing it. It's grown a lot in the last 5 years or 6 years, but it just started to become more and more viable. We grew over time, and it just started to become a thing that it could be something to do for a living if I made a push, if I worked at it. And I had the ability and the flexibility in my life to do that. And so we made the push. We started getting enough people suggesting that we tried to, put more content out and to try and up our production and all this other stuff. So we took on the challenge, and it's been about 3 years since we monetized, and I'd say the first year was a pretty big struggle, but by the second year, it was at least enough to get by, and now it's solid. I'm doing well enough that we can, spend a little money on other people, bringing other people in and getting them paid so that they can contribute, and also just being established, being around, and just, there's so many millions of fans of Game of Thrones, and there's so many of them that still just haven't even heard of us or any of the podcasts that are out there.
Wow.
So I feel like there's still a lot more to go in terms of growth and fun.
Absolutely. Well, you'll get at least, I would say, 2, maybe 3 listeners from after this show goes live. So that's really good. Me and Tommy will be 2 of the 3.
That's right.
And me and Tommy will be 2 of the 3, and then Mum will probably your mum
will kick in.
If both their mums, that'll be 4. You'll probably have 4 new listeners after this show's released. So we're doing our bit for the fandom. But so I've got so many questions, Aziz. I want to ask you. You mentioned that obviously Game of Thrones has been such a cultural phenomenon. It's one of the only things that I believe that the television show or the movie comes out and is pretty much. Oh, Lord of the Rings is another good example, but is
that's true.
Up there on par with the actual original written work. Let me ask you: are you at your core? I know what the answer is going to be, I feel like, but are you a book or a TV man? And how did you grapple with the changes? Because I've read the books and I've watched the TV, and it took me a very long time to get my head around being okay with the changes. And I'll tell you how I did that after your answer. But how are you books or TV, and how did you deal with the whole when we started going off track with the TV?
Well, I'm certainly a book guy. I read the books, long time before the show, about 10 years before the show came out. And, like a lot of people, it's kind of where you started is kind of what you prefer. Although I think a lot of people, picked up the show and then read the books and ended up preferring that. But it's hard to compare. I think I understand a lot of the criticisms. I agree with a lot of the criticisms of the show, but it's such a different medium.
Yeah.
There's so many things in the show that the books can't do, and there's so many things in the books that the show can't do. Just some examples. Some of the, there's nothing that replaces George's writing. Nothing at all. Even when they borrow lines straight from the books, well, maybe except when they borrow lines straight from the books, you just can't write someone's inner thoughts that well.
Yeah.
You can't project that on TV. But likewise, can't have amazing acting in a book. You can't have this fantastic music in a book, right? These things don't exist. So parts of it are just so hard to compare. And I think some people get a little too far down one rabbit hole or the other, not realizing how hard it is to compare the two because the mediums are so different. So I have plenty of criticisms for the show. There's a lot of things I would not have done if I were them, a lot of things that I would have done differently, a lot of things that I think they made a mistake on. But I also recognize it's a huge challenge of adapting such a thing, such a giant thing. There's no way you could get it all into a TV show. So you have to give them some consideration for the parts of the process that we're not privy to. I'm sure in this writer room, they probably had some big debates on what to not use and what to use. And it probably had some really tough cuts. They were just like, look, we just don't have time to do this particularly awesome plot that we all love from the books. And that's just how it goes. But also, as far as being a book fan goes, I can't deny that the show has brought millions, literally millions of new readers to the community. And so that is something that I give the show a lot of credit for, just expanding the world, bringing in new people. And every time a new episode comes out, we do our podcast, we do several episodes on it, and it's just a blast how everyone comes together and talks about it. And we have yet to have that experience with a new book, because even though we've been doing this for 6 years, that's about when the last book came out. So we haven't been doing this when a major book release came out. And I'm really excited to experience that, even though it might not be for quite a while still. It's going to be amazing. And the show has kind of given me a taste for what that's going to be like. So I have a lot of praise for both.
No, that's great. I think the way that I look at it, the way that I was able to kind of be okay with the changes in the TV show as the seasons would wear on, and Lady Stoneheart wasn't involved, and Robb Stark's wife was totally different, and the story obviously was evolving, and I would get so frustrated. I'm like, how? Why? What are you doing? And then the only way that I could be at peace was I figured out in my head. I'm like, okay, the books is what really happened. and the TV show is my drunk mate at a bar telling me roundabouts. This is pretty much how it went down.
I like an alternate drunk universe version.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how I've got my head around it. But I think, like you say, it'll be very interesting to see how it goes when the new book comes out. It'll be very exciting. I think it must be cool for you being able to release a podcast every week, because people all around the world, I know I do, there's no other TV show on the planet that I've ever had nights for. So we would have Game of Thrones nights where all our friends would come around, we'd get cheese and dips and platters and beers and whatever, and we would all sit there, we would watch we would watch the week before's episode, and then we'd roll straight into the new episode, so we were refreshed, and then we were into the new exciting brand new one. Streamed illegally, of course. But like all good TV shows are. But yeah, that's cool, that's amazing. So when I stumbled upon you and your podcast, Aziz, was through Daniele Boglielli and History of Fire. So that was really cool, really epic episode. And I personally have a bunch of questions I want to get your ideas on for like predictions and theories and stuff. But before we do, one of the things I think is most interesting about Game of Thrones is the historical significance. Can you touch on a bit of how George really moulded the story around historical events and particularly the Yorks and the Lancasters and the War of Roses and so forth?
Yeah, so you mentioned that episode we did, this collaboration with Daniele Boglielli of History on Fire. And the idea there was to compare, he's a history guy, and I love history too. And we just went through and compared a lot of real world events with things that happened in Game of Thrones, knowing that they were inspired by, or that George R.R. Martin took that inspiration from the real world. And George, one of the things that he really likes to do is to make his setting, realistic, which is kind of funny to think when you have dragons and things like that. That's not realistic at all. But what he means is that he wants characters to behave realistically.
Yeah.
The setting is not realistic, but he wants his characters to behave the way real people would. And by putting them in a fantasy setting, that puts them in situations that real humans have never been in. But they're still, living, breathing people in terms of how they behave. It's very authentic. And that's one of the things I think that makes it all great is how well he does that. But, there's also the issue of portrayal of, or rather, a way to make sure you're doing things realistically is to borrow from history, because then you know that you're grounded in things that have really happened. Mm-hmm. And George himself is a huge fan of history. He loves history. He particularly loves the medieval period, but he's just been a fan of history all his life, and he's, approaching 70 years old, so he's had a long time to, take in historical facts.
Part of medieval history, nearly. The old boy.
Right? So he's included a lot, and it's almost amazing how often we turn up new examples that we're pretty sure might be historical. Even the wildfire plot, the blowing up of the wildfire, Cersei blowing up the wildfire at the end of season 6 there, that's kind of similar to the gunpowder plot. Because even then they had a big issue with moving it. Once they captured all this gunpowder, they uncovered this plot. They still had this issue of what to do with all that gunpowder. They still had to get rid of it. They still had to carry it out. And this is the same thing with the wildfire. That wildfire was left behind by Aerys, the Mad King. Nobody knew it was there, and it's just sitting there. So it's kind of more of a loose parallel. But like you said, the Starks and the Lannisters are parallel to the Lancasters and the Yorks. You can see the similarity of their names. Mm-hmm. And then the War of the Roses is certainly probably the number one historical event or series of events that relates to Game of Thrones, among uncountable other numbers of events. But
and so just to jump in there on the Lancasters and the Yorks. So just because I was fascinated when I found out this very fact, because I've got a friend who's from York, Craig McCartney. Yeah. Craig McCartney's from York, and he looks like a Viking, and he looks like a wildling, kind of like he looks like he's north of the wall, or in the north, and the Lancasters. So if the Yorks were from obviously Yorkshire, so the Lancasters were from the south, right? Were they from London?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you look at England on a map, it's actually geographically very, very.
It's Game of Thrones.
Yeah. It's Game of Thrones, which
it's just Westeros made big and then flipped one day.
Yeah. It sucks for anyone in London because that means they're Lannisters,
Wales, right?
Yeah.
Just even.
Yeah. So it's
no shit.
Yeah, cool. So what's your favourite out of all the things that they talk about and whether they are actually direct borrowings from history or not, what's your favourite crossover in between Game of Thrones and history? I know there's a lot.
Ooh, that's a tough one. I do really like the Wars of the Roses is a really big one just because it's so deep and the comparisons run so deep. There's so many. Like Robert Baratheon is basically Edward I and Richard the Second. Is it Richard the Second? I forget. Richard the Second. It's either Richard the Second or Richard the Third. I always forget. Is like a combination of Ned Stark and Stannis. It's just really it all fits so really well. Marguerite d'Anjou is a lot like Cersei. So anyway, but there's my favorite is really hard. Maybe I kind of go back and forth. Maybe on this the one that I'm most interested in the moment, and one that we talked about a lot in that crossover episode with Daniele Bolelli was these amazing parallels between the Children of the Forest and the Mexica, who are more commonly referred to as the Aztecs, but what they call themselves Mexica, as Daniele points out. So that's probably the right thing to call them. So, and they would use things like they used obsidian blades and didn't use metalworking, and they had a lot of human sacrifice, and they'd
never seen white people before.
Yeah, so
White
it's
Walkers.
really
No shit.
when we see all these things in Game of Thrones, you see the Children of the Forest, sacrificing people to turn them into something else, or in the books, it's just regular sacrifice. It's not just necessarily converting them into something. And the flaying tradition from the Boltons is something that the Mexica did a lot. They did a lot of flaying and wearing of skin and things like that, wearing of human skin, and all this just really kind of, frankly, pretty darn disturbing stuff. It's good that this thing is long, 600 and so years in the past and is long gone. But it kind of touches on, one of the things I really like about it is it touches on, it's a real thing. It kind of shows that as gruesome as George can get, the real world is often far worse. And I like that he draws these parallels to show us that the real world is just as bad or worse, and that it's also captures that mysteriousness. It's like, wow, these people really believed that they had to kill these people. They had to sacrifice them or the sun just wouldn't rise the next day. God would kill them all. It was a deeply held belief, and it's just mind-blowing that how different that is to like our existence today. In the Aztec
at Chichen Itza, there's the famous ball court, and they used to have
the Mayans.
The Aztecs.
Oh, the Aztecs.
Mines are
The Mayans. Chichen Itza in Mexico.
Yeah,
the
Mines.
The Mayans.
Yeah, so they had the famous ball court, and it would be a great honour to be able to play in the ball court, and the team that won were lucky enough to get sacrificed.
When you want to lose.
Yeah. But because me and Tommy did a trip out to Mexico, and we were getting a tour, and we were like, "Hang on a sec, did you just wait? Can you? I think you had it the other way around.
Yeah, that's right.
If you win, you get to kill all the guys that lose." Yeah. But that's the most fascinating parallel. I had no idea about that, because if you think about the White Walkers trying to take over and absolutely killing everybody in their path, and they're evil. That's to signify the conquistadors and what they did to the. That's fucking incredible.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
right. And it's just it makes you realize that it's not really that different than a fantasy setting, right? Because you have picture yourself as either side. If you're the Spaniards invading, you're like, holy crap, they're eating people and wearing their skins. Yeah. What the hell? Yeah. And then on the other side, you're the Mexica, and you're like, what the heck? These guys are riding these giant beasts. They have war dogs, and the locals have never seen anything larger than a Chihuahua. Yeah. And they're wearing metal, and they have these guns. They've never seen guns before. It's like this to them. It was a fantasy world. Like
magic.
It's not really any different than if you and I just saw dragons right now.
Yeah, because you've never seen them before.
Perspective point of view,
so true.
So that to me is like one of the great things about the setting is that he focuses on the characters, and the fact that the setting is so fantastical. Really, if you go back in the real world, you can find, from a human perspective, situations that must have seemed very much magical.
Even more so.
Beyond understanding,
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely.
That's blowing my mind.
Crazy, hey?
Yeah.
So, have you met the big dog? Have you met George?
Yes.
Aziz?
I have met him several times, actually.
Cool.
3 or 4 times, I guess. I had dinner with him twice, and I hung out. One time we hung out in his hotel room, and I still have a souvenir from that. He gave me a can of beer that I never drank. I saved it.
Yeah.
He gave us we were at one thing we do is we have this strategy of George is a very down-to-earth guy. He likes to go to conventions. He's been going to conventions since the 70s and before he was famous. And even now that he's still famous, he still goes to conventions. A lot less these days because he's trying to finish this book and he's got a really busy schedule. But he still goes every once in a while. And I kid you not, this is 3 years ago, so not that long ago. The show is still massively popular, even 3 years ago. And we're just at a convention in I believe this one was in North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina. And it's very normal at a convention for people to host parties in their hotel rooms. Just a regular 2-bedroom, just like a couple people with a drink here and there, some snacks. George just walks into one of these parties while we're standing there and just has a seat in the corner and grabs a beer. And people are just like, well, hi there. And he just starts talking, telling stories, and everybody gathers around and just listens. And he's just completely unassuming. He's not arrogant. He's just down to earth, just wants to hang out and talk to like-minded people. He just likes geeks and hanging out with his people. It's really cool. Money doesn't seem to have changed him all that much. He has all this, millions of dollars, and he just lives in the. He lives in the same house. He just bought the house across the street, so they have like 2 houses like next to each other.
That's so cool.
Two castles.
Have, they have
divided by a moat.
So.
No, George.
So that's kind of become that work went so well. What happened was, my co-host and girlfriend Ashaya, she chatted up with one of George's assistants, whose name is Rhea, and she's also an artist. And they just, they left the party eventually, and they invited us to come up and hang out with about 5 or 6 other people. And George spent most of that time in the corner talking with someone about politics. But
you're like, fuck, give me a second.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Trump's conservative views?
Yeah.
We've also had a couple dinners with him, and that was fun. He's just the same thing. People generally kind of defer to hear what he wants to have to say, but he doesn't like force it or just try to talk over anybody. He just kind of he likes a good restaurant. We had some barbecue with him once, and good times. And I can't remember what the other one was, but I can't remember what the other restaurant was. But yeah, he's a great guy, and he. What was it? A pub, yeah. It was like an Irish pub, I guess. That's right. Yeah. And another story about how approachable and friendly he is. The first time we ever met him was just at a signing, so it wasn't. We didn't really meet him, so to speak. We just got to say hi and he signed something of ours. It's really common, say, even for Game of Thrones actors, to charge money for their signature. Yep. That's pretty normal. I don't do it. I never pay for a signature, but I kind of understand. They come a long way. It's what they do for a living. George does not, though. George does not charge for signatures, and he is extremely patient, despite the fact that he has probably signed who knows how many things over the years, uncountable. We were in line outside of this convention, and everyone was a little nervous that the signing was going to end before we got in. During the signing, someone comes out and says, nobody worry. George has said that anyone currently in line is going to get their stuff signed as long as it takes.
Wow.
Fuck, what a leg.
That's the kind of guy he is. That's just who he is. He's not doing it for, just to for his image or anything. It's all genuine. So it's really cool. It makes it all easier being in this fandom to know that the guy who created it all is a great person.
Yeah.
So
true.
true.
100%.
So true.
Hey, so Aziz, do you mind if I actually want to get into this sooner rather than later, these questions that I have, because I feel like they're going to be very expansive answers, every single one of them. So I just want to ask you the biggest questions that are still out there, I believe, in A Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones. Now, your answers are going to be difficult because obviously a few of these, there's going to be differing answers judging on whether we're talking about the book or the TV show, but I'll just leave it up to you to answer in whichever way you like. I'm really excited for this, by the way. I'm really 100% on here.
Bill's full barb down below.
Yeah. And all right, so the first one that I want to touch on is the the Tyrion the Targaryen theory.
Okay.
Obviously, bolstered by Tywin's call Tywin's line when he dies, and I don't know if this is in the books or the TV show or just the TV show. You'll have to pull me up on this, but when Tywin Lannister gets shot by Tyrion, spoiler alert, anyone that's on season 2.
No, he
says,
behind, folks.
I do remember that.
He says, "You are no son of mine."
Yeah.
But there's a million other reasons why
He could have just hated the bloke.
Yeah. There's a million other reasons why Tyrion could be a Targaryen, and I want you to blow everybody's mind with the theories behind this, Aziz.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I'm glad you asked that one because I'm not sure if you know, but I've been maybe not a proponent of this theory for a long time, but
Wow.
since maybe 2004, 2005, I've been entertaining this idea.
Yep.
And the thing is, we don't know for sure. I'm not going to sit here and say he is or he isn't, but what I will say is whether the evidence supports the possibility, and I think that it definitively does. It doesn't mean I think it's true, but the evidence is there. So let's go through some of it. There's a lot of it, and we can't possibly go through all of it. But there's a lot of ways to look at it, and there's also some things that might indicate that it's not necessarily that it's pointing to something else. Some of this evidence could point to something else other than his ancestry. Mm-hmm. Now, the main bit is that right away, as you're reading about Tyrion in the books, there's dragon stuff. From his very first chapter, it's mentioned that he had dreams of dragons as a kid, and and in the 5th book, Makoro, the Red Priest, who's not in the show, whose visions have been very accurate, unlike Melisandre's, who is kind of hit or miss.
Yeah.
He says that he envisions Tyrion surrounded by dragons, old and young, big and small, and him in the middle of it all, which is interesting. And of course, like you said, there's several things Tywin said. Tywin at one point said, I can't prove that you're not mine, but he also said, you're my son. He said it a couple different ways.
Yeah.
Either way, I think one of the common arguments against the thing is people don't like it. I think, honestly, that's one thing that the biggest argument against it is people just don't like it. They don't want it to be true, which, of course, isn't evidence. It's just kind of a hope, and if enough people don't want it to be true, maybe George will not write it that way. He's certainly given himself room to go either direction. He may not have even decided himself which he wants to do yet.
Yeah.
That's his style.
Yeah.
He says that there's two types of authors, gardeners and architects. Architects plan everything out and then fill it in. George is a gardener. He kind of goes with his flow and sees where it takes him. And that has advantages and disadvantages. We won't get into that because that's kind of far afield from talking about Tyrion. But one of the most common arguments against this theory is that people say it undermines his relationship with Tywin. And I think that's actually borderline offensive, not like as a fan. But what it says is if you think that Tywin isn't Tyrion's father, not his sire, the difference is father versus sire. Mm-hmm. What does that say about what you think of adopted people? Like Tywin was his father, period. Whether or not it was his sperm that, Tyrion grew from, that's a different issue. Jon Snow is not Ned's son, but Ned was his father, right? Yeah. And that's the guy who raised him. That was his father figure. And that's what matters. It doesn't matter whether, that's ultimately what it boils down to. I'm someone who never met his father. So, this is a little more personal to me. I wasn't adopted, but, I...
You're not son of Aerys Targaryen as well, are you? Yeah,
I am, actually. I dye my hair because I don't want anyone to know. It's normally kind of silver. I'm wearing contacts. I like fire.
Aziz, what about the whole? Can you touch on surely there's one of the big parts to play in this is and forgive me if I'm wrong. So Tywin left King's Landing in a hissy fit, right, with Aerys after they had a big fight and a big falling out.
Yes.
That ties pretty well into the whole marriage ceremony of the king taking his rights with the bride on the evening of the wedding, right? So, There is a direct correlation to actually, Aerys maybe bit of hamal in the pumas with Joanna, Tywin's wife, and
the
Tyrion's.
timeline works really well. In fact, the World of Ice and Fire book that came out in 2014 was very specific that there was rumors that Aerys and Joanna had an affair, not an affair, but a relationship. It was before either of them were married, so it wouldn't have been an affair. Mm-hmm. But the person who says this didn't happen is Pycelle, and he's like, because Tywin would never take another man's leavings. Like, come on, Pycelle. What are you talking about? Pycelle is such a Lannister fanboy. That's a terrible argument. He's like, Tywin would never do that. He doesn't offer evidence. He's just like, Tywin would never do that. Like,
I take every man's leavings.
That's terrible. Yes. That's a terrible
leavings are the best kind of take.
Leavings
but it's very specifically said. You mentioned this example where Tywin was embarrassed because Aerys basically fondled Joanna during the betting. And then later, he tried to resign, but Aerys didn't accept his resignation. And Rhaella, Aerys' wife, sent Joanna back to Casterly Rock because she was like, well, I can do something about this, because that was one of her ladies in waiting. So she resolved the situation by sending Joanna away. Joanna didn't return until 272. The year 272, she visited again. Mm-hmm. And in the year 273, Tyrion was born.
Wow. So,
and someone didn't really put that detail in the book. So if he didn't want us to think that, if he wants us to think that Tyrion is possibly a Targaryen, he added fuel to the fire in the world of Ice and Fire in multiple places. He didn't throw any shade on it. So it could be a red herring. Absolutely could be a red herring. Because his arc certainly had to do with dragons. That doesn't mean he is one of them, right? He certainly he's headed towards probably being on Team Daenerys, as the show has indicated. It's probably the same thing that's in the books.
Don't we also need...
That's close enough, right? That doesn't mean he has to be a Targaryen or have the blood.
We need 3 dragon riders, though, do we not? Oh, no, but now the Night King's a dragon rider.
Well, that's kind of a funny difference from the book and show, right?
Yeah, that's right.
If a dragon's going to die beyond the wall in the books, is someone going to be riding it when that happens?
Yeah.
Is Tyrion or someone going to be on that dragon when it's taken down?
Yeah,
I don't know if that's even going to happen because there's no Night King in the book. There's no. It might just be a dragon without, an undead dragon without a rider that's just kind of doing its thing. It doesn't have to have a rider.
Okay, forget I said that one because it's too much of a can of worms. But we could talk for 2 hours on every one of these questions. So, if you were to give it a rough percentage, what would you say percentage chance of Tyrion being a Targaryen would be?
Okay, that's good. I would say about 35%, and to
not bad.
Give you a little extra data there. Before The Winds of Winter and The World of Ice and Fire came out, I had it at about 20% because I was asked that same question. I said about 1 in 5. But after those 2 books came out, the chance went up because of that specific detail on Tyrion's birth and where Joanna was. Very specific detail added to that book, plus the whole bit about some of the stuff in Dance with Dragons with Tyrion's the Mokoro's vision. And then there's I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a sample chapter that from The Winds of Winter that's been released. There's been about 6 or 7 of those released already.
Yep. And
one of those has a little more evidence for it. I won't be specific for that in case anyone hasn't read that yet. But
awesome.
There's even more than you may not be aware of. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's great. All right, I'm going to skip some of these questions that I had. I wanted to talk about Cold Hands, but I'm not going to do that. I wanted to talk about the Doom of Valyria, but I'm not going to talk about that. Let's talk about Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the hero of the whole story. Obviously, there's a lot of theories there. Obviously, the one that everyone leans towards is probably that it's Jon Snow. It could be Daenerys. People say it could be Jaime. But
a lot of things.
I feel like in the books, the most common answer is not always going to be the one that comes through because this is not a fairy tale, like George R. R. Martin famously says. So Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, the guy that's going to save the world, or we assume. Who do you think could be Azor Ahai and why?
Okay, well, I think what's interesting is that George has given us multiple similar prophecies from different cultures, which is, I guess you could say that's kind of similar to how multiple cultures around the real world have their own version of the flood myth, right? Which means it probably wasn't a myth. It's something that, a lot of different, it's just been, the details are long lost, but there's some sort of thing that they're all referring to that happened in the ancient past. And so for this example, it's kind of similar. We have a lot of possibilities, but it's also kind of narrowed down in a kind of in a funnier way, I guess. And I don't know. That's kind of tricky.
We've got him. We've stumped the big dog. You are no son of mine, Aziz.
So I think what we're dealing with, I think we have multiple people that fit the prophecy, and I think that might be the reason. The answer is that there are going to be multiple heroes. We don't have to have just one hero. George, it's kind of been long said that George R. R. Martin loves to break tropes, and he does. But if he broke every trope, that would be just as predictable as going with every trope. You're like, oh, well, it's not going to, something different's going to happen here. As far as, so I think Azor Ahai is probably pointing to Daenerys, and the last hero, which is a similar legend, but with some fundamentally different details, that points more to Jon Snow. Interestingly, the stallion who mounts the world, which is also related, it's the Dothraki version of the same basic prophecy. They all thought that was Rhaego, Dany's son, was going to be the stallion that mounts the world. But Daenerys herself is checking all those boxes off that prophecy. And the reason I think that she fits Azor Ahai better than Jon Snow is this is one particular line that's just really hard to get around. And that line is, when the world falls into darkness, Azor Ahai will come again to wake dragons from stone.
Boom.
No one else did that, but that's very specific. So
that's pretty
Jon
definitive.
later wakes some dragons from stone. There's really no way around that one.
Yeah, that's bang on. Question answered.
Yeah.
Problem
So
solved.
I think that it's going to be, that's the big trick that I think a lot of people are kind of like, who's it going to be? But I don't think it has to be one person. I think that's kind of the little sideways turn it's going to take, that we'll have several people that fit. And it won't just be one. He may leave it open. We're not going to. George doesn't like to give answers on the truly mysterious stuff. He's been out there saying, well, no, we're not going to ever find out if the gods are real or not, for example.
Yeah.
He's not going to reveal that. Because how would anyone know? How would anyone in the world ever learn that?
Yeah, that's right.
So we can't. They can't learn it. We can't learn.
Yeah.
Because there's no narrator. That's the only way you would ever learn that. It would have to be through a POV. And what POV character can ever learn whether gods exist or not? Like that's
Well, it depends on what sort of POV you're talking about.
All right, cool. So my next question is the prophecy, the famous prophecy with Cersei and the Valonqar. I'm not sure how you pronounce it.
Valonqar,
Valonqar. So she's obviously the prophecy is that basically somebody's going to come and murder Cersei. That's what we're out to believe, and everybody's pointing
the
towards
little brother. Yeah,
the little brother.
Translation: Valonqar means little brother.
The Valonqar.
So
touch on that
she,
one
of course,
first,
thinks it's
Aziz.
Tyrion. I don't think this is complicated. I think there's a lot of candidates for who's going to kill her and who the little brother could be, but I don't think this needs to be complicated. I think it's just Tyrion. I think it's that straightforward. I think that Tyrion really wants to kill Cersei, and he is clever and cunning enough to do it, and but he's not going to. I think that it's so. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I think it is going to be Jaime. I think that she thinks it's going to be Tyrion.
Yes.
It's not. It's going to be Jaime. Jaime's the one that is on the path to distancing himself from Cersei. Cersei's kind of going down with her own ship in a sense, and Jaime's kind of ready to leave that ship, as we saw him burn her letter at the end of A Feast for Crows, and then in the show he rides off and leaves her. So I think that's kind of where we're headed. And I'm not sure that he's literally going to kill her, but I think he probably will. It might just be that his actions lead to her death, but I think he is going to literally kill her and die with her, quite likely.
Ooh.
Because it's been said they came into the world together and they want to go out together, et cetera, and I don't think he's going to be able to live with himself afterwards, even though he's going to know it was the right thing to do. But she's such a part of him. He hates her now, but he's never going to, it's like learning to hate your mother, but it's not your mother because he's your lover. It's just something we can't fathom their relationship really.
Yeah.
And thinking about it too much is creepy, so you don't really want to.
I think about it a lot.
It's
I'm a
so
creeper.
hard to wrap
And
your
Bill
head
has a
around
sister.
how much he is wrapped up in her.
Yeah.
I feel like myself personally that's the one that George will just definitively give us. I feel like he's going to be like, right, we've hated these Lannisters long enough. You know what? Now we love Jaime. Let's see him go out. I totally agree with you, to be honest. I think Jaime's going to make a hero of himself by Cersei's going to do something that's going to jeopardize everything. fuck everything up for everyone against the White Walkers. That's already happening. But I feel like that's what's going to happen. It's going to be the same scenario where Jaime has to take one for the team. He took one for the team being the Kingslayer when he was actually saving all of King's Landing, and now he became this figure that everybody hated. He's going to do the same thing, and it's going to cost him his life, I believe. What's your percentages, Aziz, with Jaime being the Valonqar, the little brother?
Very high. I'd put it around 90%.
Oh, that's a nice one.
No.
That's a nice one.
There's got to be some room to be wrong, but, like, for example, R plus L equals J, Rhaegar and Lyanna being the son, or the parents of Jon, I'd call that 99.9, nothing's 100. So just for reference. So, yeah. This is up there. It's no sure thing, but, yeah, I think sometimes we get a little too deep in the rabbit hole, and sometimes it's because there's, we've been waiting a while for the last books. People just kind of think, and sometimes we think a little too hard on things that aren't really that complicated. But it pays to be wary of our certainty, and that's part of the fun.
Absolutely. All right, so my next question, and this is obviously just more show related, so all the fanboys of the show that haven't read the books. So, who do you think? What's your theory on who is the Night's King?
I think that the Night King is probably a Stark. As we're told in the books, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch is the one who became the Night King version in the book, and it's also revealed in the show, which is probably true in the books, that the Children of the Forest created the White Walkers, and it would make sense that they would need people, not just any. They couldn't just make anyone into a White Walker. They would need someone with special blood. That's kind of a theme throughout all of Game of Thrones. Like blood and where your blood comes from matters in different ways. Power in King's blood. We've heard that line a bunch of times. And blood magic is a part of a lot of different things, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different traditions. I mean, Miri Mazdur, we see the blood sacrifice to bring the dragons and all that. Lots of different things. Kind of got wrapped up in my own thoughts there. I don't even know what I was talking about.
The 13th Lord Commander.
The
13th Lord Commander, a Stark.
Oh, yeah, Night King, right. I think it was a Stark. We're told that it was maybe the brother of the Lord of Winterfell at the time, who would have been Brandon the Breaker, if I recall correctly. Not known as Brandons. There's so many Brandons. So I don't think he's Bran Stark. I do not believe this Bran Stark is a Night King theory. That doesn't make any sense to me. George we certainly saw a little bit of time travel, but it wasn't really time travel, so to speak. It was kind of like
looking into the
almost like a time blip. He wasn't fully there. It was kind of like in his head he was there. I don't know how the books are going to handle that part, but I think it's going to be similar-ish, but not maybe even more tragic, maybe a little more painful.
Yeah, cool. So percentage out of 100 for a Stark being the Night's King, 13th Lord Commander.
I'd say pretty darn high, not 90, not as high as some of these others, but we'll go 2/3. We'll go 66%.
Cool. I like it. All right. So my final question, I wanted to save this one with a bit of time up the sleeve with the show. So the question everybody wants to know, I have my theory. It's not a well-rounded theory, but I have my answer to the question. And I've been saying this for 2 seasons of the TV show, and I believe that although they differ, the book and the TV, I feel like whoever sits on the throne in the television is going to sit on the throne in the books. I feel like that has to be the case. And I don't think they can change that much. I think that would be wrong to do. So, and it's actually been a couple of seasons ago, I started to get a vibe for where I think it's going to go, which I'll explain after. But I want to get your thoughts on. Actually, no, I'll explain mine now because because I'll steal all your ideas and end up cheating. But I think that AzizAl-Doory. I think my theory is that Jon and Daenerys will have a child. They'll either one or both of them most probably will die. The White Walkers will decimate everywhere, but they'll be killed off. And I think that Sansa will sit the throne with her husband that was Tyrion Lannister, either as her husband or as her hand. I'm not sure about who's the king, either Tyrion or someone else, but I think Sansa Stark will sit on the Iron Throne. Who do you think will sit on the Iron Throne and why?
Okay, well, two possibilities. I want to throw a slight curveball, but also answer the question. One, I think there's a very strong possibility that there is no Iron Throne at the end. You're right. I totally agree that there is going to be a massive amount of decimation, and I think that may involve King's Landing being destroyed, or nearly destroyed, which would maybe create, make it difficult for anyone to pick up the pieces and rule the whole realm after it's so devastated. However, I completely agree that if there still is an Iron Throne at the end, Sansa, absolutely.
Oh, wow!
I'm totally
very
with you.
good.
One of my regular co-hosts feels the same way.
Really?
I think it's actually become a fairly popular idea. Not popular, but it's starting to gain traction. I don't remember seeing people say that much years ago, but it's starting to become more of a popular idea. It's starting to gain serious traction. It makes a lot of sense. She's the player. She's the only one who's truly being a player right now. Daenerys is a conqueror. She's not really an intriguer. She's not playing politics that much. She's realizing that she is going in a different direction. She's got to she's kind of having the same realization Stannis did. Stannis in the books has that moment where he realizes he says it, I believe the way he says it is, I was trying to win the throne to save the realm, and I should save the realms to win the throne. Daenerys is kind of having that same moment. She's already had it in the show. She's going to have it in the books, I believe, where she realizes that she's kind of entitled. She's like, I'm just killing all these people just to get the throne. I don't know. This isn't right. Am I really that deserving of the throne just because my crazy ass father had it, and he was terrible? Do I really deserve it? And that's part of her youth and her arc, is she's learning, that it's not just about power. There's some responsibility going on here. But I also agree that there's a very strong chance he doesn't live through the series. I think that's entirely possible, if not likely, that she will not survive the series. And Jon, same thing. I don't know that he's going to make it. And if he does, he's going to be like partly undead or something, right? Like the guy was raised from the dead. I don't know if that's a king that people, I don't know how that's going to work, because people are going to know. In the show, they kind of glossed over that a little bit. No one talks about the fact that he's undead, basically. In the books, I don't think it's going to go so smoothly. People are going to be like, that guy came back from the dead. I don't know about him.
Wouldn't that make him more grandiose, more kingly?
Personality afterwards,
Wouldn't that make him more grandiose, more kingly, more regal, more superhuman to have come back from the dead? If I see a guy who's like a worthy king, he gets murdered and then goes, oh yeah, you know what? Fuck that, I'm coming back. Yeah. I'm like, well, mate, you are obviously my king, my friend. Well, I'm not here to...
that's a good point too, because we have the Varys' king, this young Griff, the fake Aegon that may or may not be the son of Rhaegar in the books here, and their deal with him was, they said, well, he's the perfect candidate to be king because he's learned how to struggle, he's learned how to suffer, he's learned all these things.
Actually,
he's seen it from the bottom, he's seen it from the top.
One of my favorite parts of the whole book.
John has done this far more. John has lived that far closer than, he's died and come back.
Kind of get better than that.
Yeah. He was Lord
Commander. He's a leader. He's experienced as a leader, and he proved that he wanted responsibility and got power. Right. This is one of my co-hosts, Sean, put it this way. I think it's really excellent. Daenerys wanted power and found herself with responsibility. Jon wanted responsibility and found himself with power. And they both kind of found themselves in the same place. It's like, whoa, I gotta do this right. This isn't just, Jon was more, I have to do this. I don't want to do this. He wanted to be a ranger. He just wanted to go out and fight and be brave, and he didn't want to lead, but he's good at it because he doesn't want to lead, partly because he doesn't desire power for power's sake. Yeah. And so I think it's really interesting. And I think that it also kind of sets him up as a guy that is heroic in a sense, and that those kind of guys, I don't know that there's a place in the aftermath for someone like that, because he's such a guy who puts himself in harm's way. Can you really imagine the wall falling in the books and Jon not being at the forefront of the efforts to fight what's happening? You know,
That's
he
right.
always puts himself in danger. It's
Yeah.
hard for me to believe he's going to make it through
That's
everything.
why he'll die. That's why he'll save the day and he will die. And he will die for good, and he will be happy. He doesn't want to be alive. He doesn't want to be going through what he's going through right now. He's like, I'm here because they need me.
Like Frodo a bit, kind of like he saved the world, but
just off it.
He's messed up. It messed him up
He's
doing
totally off it. Although he's banging Daenerys, so maybe
that'll. Well, if she dies too, then he'll really be sad, right? Like,
yeah, that's right. So, all right, let's get. I know you might not have this, but can I get some sort of a definitive prediction for Daenerys, Jon, Tyrion, and Sansa? Well, what do you think, and Sansa? What do you think it's going to look like if you're in your best bet at the end of the day, Aziz?
Okay, so I think either Jon and Dany are both. I don't see them making it through. I think Sansa lives. I think there's a good chance she's in a very high position of power, if not the highest position of power at the end of it all. And I think that most of the characters who have died on the show are going to also die in the books. And I think we have yet to see the biggest swath of deaths. You know, the last season there were a lot of deaths, but it was mostly secondary characters.
That's right.
We still have the kind of core that hasn't really been touched in a while. You know what I mean? Like early on, there were plenty of top characters dying, but then they kind of narrowed it down, and there was like this core that just isn't touchable, like Arya, Sansa, Jon, Tyrion, Daenerys. But with that, by the end, though, that some of them won't be untouchable. I don't think Arya is going to make it through, which is sad because George R. R. Martin's wife said that if he kills off Arya, they're done.
What a
She
classic!
named one of their cats after Arya, just as a way to encourage George not to kill the character off, because
He'll have to kill the cat too, and that'll be really
name the cats
creepy.
after the characters, but she broke the rule intentionally to try and encourage him to keep Arya alive. I also think that
Go on.
I think Tyrion lives. I think Sam lives. I think Davos. Davos is. I'm torn on Davos, and I'm kind of biased because he's my favorite character, so I'm not sure. I want him.
Maybe Davos could be king.
That would be awesome. Like rising from the bottom. That's the cool thing about Davos is he's the only recurring character in POV wise that was common born. Almost everybody else is a noble. The only exceptions are some of the prologues where you get kind of a one-off of someone like on the lowest realms of society, which is kind of an interesting perspective that we don't normally get. So that's part of why I like Davos so much. Also, you're just like, how can you not like Davos? The guy's just like so genuine and honest.
He's the man.
The POV structure allows you to see inside his head. You know it's real. You know he's not just talking that way to get to where he's going.
Yeah. So
I see there's a good chance the seven kingdoms kind of go back to being 7 or 8 kingdoms. They kind of split apart again.
Yep.
Or maybe they form a whole new kind of government, some sort of new style. I don't know. Because you kind of hear them talking about that at the end of season 7 there. They're talking about, differences in government. They kind of briefly touched on that. And to me, that was almost like foreshadowing. Like, I wonder if this is endgame type stuff that they're,
planting the seed for.
Scratching the surface stuff, kind of setting us up for it later.
So Aziz, if Sansa does sit the throne, is there any clues as to who or any real threads? And we'll get you out of here in a sec. But is there? Because that's the one thing I really feel like it's going to be Sansa, but I can't for the life of me. Tyrion, maybe like the story of, but I feel like Tyrion is supposed to be the hand of whoever the queen may be. And if it's Sansa, then that works. I really like that more than him being the king. I really think that fits. But I, for the life of me, can't figure out if Sansa is queen, then who would sit by her as king? Maybe Gendry, but Gendry is an amalgamation character from the books. It's a bunch of characters. Do you have any thoughts on who would be a potential candidate to sit with Sansa?
That is a good question. I think, and you're right to say that it's kind of hard to envision who that might be. There's not a lot of obvious candidates, I don't think. She's not going to marry, Jon or something. I don't think that would be a little too. We don't need to go there.
John's just banging all his shoulders.
If you just look at the list of characters who are relatively close to her age, who are like decent people. Like there's just not much there.
No.
For a while I thought maybe a decent candidate was Edric Dane. Who Arya meets when she's with the Brotherhood without banners. Edric Dane was also called Ned Dane, was Beric Dondarrion's squire. And I believe George's original plan for him was to have him wield Dawn. But I don't think that's going to work anymore because George also originally planned to have a 5-year gap after Storm of Swords where time passed.
Yeah.
So all the characters could grow up. Dragons could grow up. Edric Dane was 12 when Arya met him. Edric Dane with 5 more years is 17, and that's fine for wielding the great sword Dawn and being this, like a new champion of House Dane.
Yeah.
And he was set up that way because he was really chivalrous and really nice, and but also brave. And these are the qualities that you have to be the Sword of the Morning.
Yeah.
But with the 5-year gap gone, he's still 12. I don't think you can have a 12-year-old wielding Dawn.
No.
And that's probably why Darkstar was brought into the story. So I kind of took your question on another direction here.
Yeah.
But that happens, with talking Game of Thrones. It's so easy to go into a rabbit hole. So I think maybe Ned Dane is a possibility. Gendry is a possibility, though he's maybe... Westeros's prejudice against bastards is certainly against him a bit. But I agree with you that I don't think it's going to be Tyrion. I think that's too much of kind of like a happy ending kind of thing. I think it's a little too neat. And I agree that Hand is more of a appropriate job for him. He's good at it.
Yeah.
And it would be kind of, if we're imagining like a new regime comprised of elements from multiple places, that they're all kind of compromising to say, okay, we got a Lannister in here, we got a Stark kind of in charge, we got other people. That would be a good way to parcel it out that would make sense and be kind of equitable.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. There's just not a lot of great candidates. I don't have a good answer there. It's kind of maybe it's an argument against her being there in that spot at the end, or maybe it's just does she have to be married? Probably does if they're kind of tying the kingdoms all together again.
Well, not if Jon and Daenerys have a child and she's the queen and the queen until that child is raised to 15 or 17 ruling age.
Oh, she could be like a regent or something.
Yeah, she'd be queen regent. That'd be a good one.
Then her husband wouldn't matter as much.
I liked Sam's brother when he came in, but then he got toasted. I thought Sam's brother was really good, and I thought he could be a nice one for Sansa. He's a bit of ginger about him as well.
Yeah, I like that actor too. He was on Black Sails. That's a great show. And,
he was great.
I wish he had been in Game of Thrones a little bit longer. That was kind of brief.
Yeah, it was a bummer.
In and out, get burned.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So, percentage of chance of Sansa being queen at the end of it.
Ooh. Okay. Well, this by necessity has to be kind of on the lower end because there's so many possibilities. But I'd give her the highest. So I'll say maybe I'll go 40%, but no one else gets a higher percent.
Yeah.
So
cool.
There's also, I think there's a good percentage chance that there is no throne. I'll stick that in there too, and I think that's roughly around the same percentage chance, or maybe slightly higher. That there's just no Iron Throne at all at the end.
Cool.
So those are roughly equal in percentage chance, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Well, we've got to get out of here in about 5 minutes, Aziz. We know that. So we're going to wrap with 3 questions from me, 3 questions from Tommy, my friend. Are you ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
All righty. My first question is favourite travel destination, somewhere you've been that you love to recommend to other people?
Thailand. I love Thailand. I've been there 4 times, and I like to tell people that it's the happiest place I've ever been to, and it's kind of unexplainable till you experience it, just what it's like being around a culture where everyone is just happy and cool and kind of just take things as they come. It's until you experience that, it's just really nothing like it in the world. The people, it's really about the place is awesome in general, but the people, there's really nothing like it. Just being around that environment, it's hard to describe.
Awesome, man. I like it. I was going to throw a happy ending joke in there at the end, but I didn't get the chance.
Lady boys.
Didn't get the chance. Didn't get the chance to put that joke in there, so we'll just move on. But similar vibe, but somewhere that you haven't been, Aziz. So your absolute dream travel destination, top of your bucket list.
I would say we kind of almost touched on it earlier in the episode. I would say Machu Picchu.
Oh, nice one.
I thought you meant Westeros.
Talk about remote, talk about quite a trek, but talk about beautiful, and that would be something to see that go up on those mountains, because it's not only scenic just without the ruins, but the ruins themselves are just, from the photos and everything, just look like That makes me drool.
Yeah, it's great. I've done it. It's one of the best things I've ever done. For sure.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's rad. And then my last question is, any book that you like to recommend to people? Can't be Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I was going to say, number one. I would recommend, let's see, good question. I'm going to recommend the works of H.P. Lovecraft. We talked about the influence of history on George R. Martin, but if we're going to name one author who had the biggest influence on George R. Martin, it might be H.P. Lovecraft. The other possibility would be Frank Herbert of Dune fame, and there's a few other. Obviously, Tolkien there's no discounting Tolkien here.
Yep.
But Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft back in the day, those are the guys that kind of got it started even before Tolkien. Robert E. Howard's the guy who created Conan. That predates Tolkien. And George has been very, clear that he owes those guys a lot of a great debt for getting the genre going and making it what it is today. So awesome. I would say the works of H.P. Lovecraft, a lot of short stories. I would recommend starting with The Doom That Came to Sarnath, which features multiple names that appear in Game of Thrones. And because George borrowed those names. And also, I would recommend The Shadow over Innsmouth. And also, my favorite is the term that a lot of people are familiar with, the Call of Cthulhu. Which is just fantastic, super creepy. The writing is amazing. He packs so much into one sentence. However, the caveat with H.P. Lovecraft is that he was a horrible racist.
Right. Guy.
However, reading his work does not support racism because the dude died penniless in the late 30s, and and all his stuff is free. That's the other thing that's great about it. You just go download it for free. Same as Conan the Barbarian. You can get all that stuff for free.
Definitely wasn't expecting you to come up with that last line.
You're not partying with that.
Yeah, cool. Tommy, you're up.
All right, Aziz, what do you like to do in your spare time?
Well, my shirt here says it's a Game of Thrones crossover shirt. It says that's what I do. I like to climb, and I climb and I know things. I know things. I love rock climbing. I don't outdoor rock climb. I'm just an avid gym rock climber, and it's good. For being as a podcaster, I sit in my desk a lot, so it's really good to be active. So yeah, I climb. I do yoga. That's my ways to stay active, and I love to play games. I love board games, computer games.
Great.
Cool. Nice one.
Reading and podcasts, of course. Podcasts.
Yes.
I'm not just a maker of podcasts. I'm a huge consumer of podcasts.
Oh, good. What are your favorites?
I'm a huge fan of hardcore history,
Good one.
History on Fire, pirate history podcasts. I love the H.P. Lovecraft literary podcasts. I love Our Fake History. There's a lot. There's a lot of mostly history shows, baseball shows, and my fellow Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones community shows like Radio Westeros, Mythical Astronomy of Ice and Fire, things like that. So many great podcasts in our community.
Great. Mate, who's someone you look up to? Someone that inspires you?
Well, interesting question. I guess I would say, gosh, I don't know. Maybe I would say George R. Martin himself. It's kind of a cheap answer, but he's the guy that built all this thing that I spend all my life on. And as someone who didn't grow up with a father figure, I have a kind of a weird sense of authority figures and who to look up to. I have it kind of developed differently that way. So I looked to my mother a lot when she had me really young. Like she was a teenager when I was born, and she went to college, got her doctorate, and single mother, just kicked ass. So
killing it.
That's pretty inspiring.
Great, man. And finally, if you could invite 3 people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be and why?
Should we do 3 Game of Thrones characters that are alive?
That. 3 Game of Thrones characters.
3 Game of Thrones characters that are alive.
Please you're dead, please you're dead, please you're dead.
Okay, so Game of Thrones characters. We would have to have Aegon the Conqueror. Ooh. We would have to have the Bloodstone Emperor, who is a figure from 10,000 some years ago that may have started the Long Night according to some Eastern traditions.
Wow.
And I would love to see Aegon the Conqueror in the presence of someone so much greater than him, because he'd be all like, hey, I'm important too. And we'd need Tyrion to moderate it. So to make sarcastic jokes.
Yeah.
That would be kind of, I don't know, maybe we'd need a couple of different voices in there, but maybe we'd need like a Cersei instead to like cause the opposite sort of situation. Instead of someone moderating, it's someone that like just lights a spark and just screws the whole thing up.
Keep her in the kitchen, then light the kitchen on fire.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, that's great, mate. Well, Aziz, it's been a pleasure. And finally, mate, where can people find you? Anything you want to plug? Let us know the name of the podcast again.
Cool.
Go for it.
Well, thanks for having me on, guys. It was a lot of fun. It's neat to connect with y'all from so far away. Here in Atlanta, Georgia. Y'all are down in Australia, and that's cool. So yeah, our show is called History of Westeros, and we are on YouTube. We are on Acast. We are on iTunes under that name. Either Westeros History or History of Westeros. Either one gets you there. Most recently, we've done an episode on Bloodraven, who is the guy sitting in the tree there with Bran that helped Bran out. And he's got a fascinating backstory that involves living for, he was Lord Commander on the Wall. He was Hand of the King, and he was rumored to be a sorcerer, and he was the only master of whispers ever to command large amounts of soldiers. And he had his own private guard. Really fascinating character. The guy, he may have talked to Euron Greyjoy when he was just, in the same state as Bran, and maybe awakened him and made him a little crazy. Huge, deep rabbit hole with him, as only a character 125 years could do. Such an old character. There's so much you can talk about with a guy like that. So we love to make really long, deep dive episodes that showcase and illustrate the depth of the story and how the backstory of George R. R. Martin's world really predicts the future. Almost, he loves to do the history repeats itself kind of angle to things, and it really shows almost everything in the past relates to something in the future. My favorite example is there's a guy who really young, before anyone, well before you would have expected, he rode off with his army and conquered a big part of Westeros, and was tricked, was never defeated in battle, was killed during a peace banner situation, and was left no descendants behind in chaos in his wake. Sounds like Robb Stark, but I'm actually talking about the young dragon as opposed to the young wolf, Daeron the First, who was a 14-year-old that conquered Dorne, and his story is a lot like Robb Stark's, but from a Targaryen perspective. And there's so many examples just like that, where you've got this history repeating itself situation, which is pretty true for the real world as well. Maybe not so specifically, but in general.
Awesome. Cool.
Great.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Aziz. That was epic. That was
right
great.
on. Yeah, thanks again for having me, guys. It's fun.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, that's it from us, and that's a wrap.
Discovery Roger, go for deploy.